We are now at the conclusion of the 17th chapter of the Bhagavad-Gita. The first 6 chapters of the Bhagavad-Gita essentially deal with who am I and various means to come to that realization. From 6 to 12, from 7 to 12, we have the center or the heart of the Gita, which deals with who is God. So if the first 6 chapters deal with who am I, the second 6 chapters deal with who is God, what does the third chapter deal with? The third chapter deals with the third component of the Bhagavad Gita, which is Prakriti. It deals with what is Prakriti, what is the interaction between the individual soul, the Lord, and Prakriti, and how can the individual soul transcend Prakriti, become Gunatita, and realize God. To this end, the 17th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita discusses that while the ideal way is to follow the scripture, which will lead to the gradual transcendence of identification with Prakriti, there are those full of faith who worship, but they worship according to the gunas of Prakriti, which they identify with. So they perform yajna, dana, and tapah in Tamagun. They perform yajna, dana, tapah in Rajagun. And then there are those who are able to transcend Tamo and Rajaguna and perform yajna, dana, and tapa in Sattvaguna. For those who are performing their yajna, dana, tapa in Sattvaguna, they have to take the next step. And the next step is that from Sattva-gun they need to transcend the gunas altogether, which is they have to be engaged on the spiritual platform. We must understand the difference between religion and spirituality. Religion is a function of Prakriti, while spirituality is a function of the spirit. Spirituality is being situated as the soul, non-identified with Prakriti, without identification with Prakriti, and absorbed in God. Similarly, what is religion? Religion is the social, cultural, ethnic, linguistic infrastructure that helps the individual soul to disconnect from Prakriti, disconnect from identification, misidentification with Prakriti, and to move on to the spiritual platform. So yajna, dana, and tapaha are religious activities when one is performing them according to the gunas, even if it is sattva guna. It's very important to understand that sattva guna is also misidentification and it leads to entrapment. taking you away from spirituality, even though it is purer than the other Rajo and Tamaguna. Tatra sattvam nirmalatvat prakashakam anamayam sukha sanghena badnati jnana sanghena chanagaha. In 14.6, chapter 14, text 6, Krishna tells Arjuna, O sinless one, the mode of goodness being purer than the others is illuminating, and it frees one from all sinful reactions. Those situated in that mode develop knowledge, but they become conditioned by the concept of happiness. So two things happen when you are in Sattva Gun. You are attached to happiness, and you are attached to the attachment to knowledge. So therefore, we need to transcend Prakriti. And the 17th chapter, the last verses that we are going to cover today, essentially deal with how are we going to transcend Prakriti. And the answer given very clearly in the Bhagawad-Geeta is that we learn to perform yajna, dana, and tapaha as an offering to the all-pervading Lord. Because when we perform actions to the all-pervading Lord, we attain perfection. Yataha pravrittir bhutanam yena sarvamidam tatam swakarmana abhyarchaya siddhim vindati manavaha. By performing our God-given duties. And by God-given duties, we include yajna, dana, and tapaha. When we perform our God-given duties, including yajna, dana, and tapaha, in a spirit of sacrifice and devotion to the all-pervading Lord, one attains perfection. We need to transcend the ego self. We learn to rise beyond Prakriti, and we learn to connect with God. And to do so, we now come to an integral and important bridge between actions engaged in Prakriti and actions that lead directly to God. In the Bhagavad Gita, we are covering chapters 17, 23 to 28. It is most profound, but yet it is often overlooked. It is treated cursorily, and it is often treated as a ritual formula, which is Om Tat Sat. But Om Tat Sat is not a ritual formula. Om Tat Sat is Krishna's bridge from the discussion of guna-based religion to the doctrine of renunciation and liberation, which leads to spirituality and absorption in God. So these verses from 23 to 28 answer a crucial question. If yajna, dana, and tapaha, if sacrifice, austerity, charity, food, and worship can all be sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic, how can we transform them into a spiritual practice which is genuine? And the answer given is by their relation to the all-pervading Brahman through Om Tat Sat. So in 17.23, Om Tat Sat iti nirdesho Brahmanastri vidasritah Brahmanastena vedascha yagnas cha vihita pura. This threefold designation of Brahman is remembered. By it were ordained in ancient times the Brahmanas, the Vedas, and the sacrifices. These are all sections of the Vedas. Brahmanas are a section, total Vedas, and also Yagnas, which are contained in the Vedas. And Krishna goes beyond the gunas. Up till now, he has discussed sattvic yagna, sattvic tapas, sattvic dana, but even sattva remains in Prakriti. Now he introduces the threefold designation of Brahman, which is Om Tat Sat. Om Tat Sat is not, shall I say, a ritual formula. Om Tat Sat is indeed not just a sound. Om Tat Sat is a spiritual orientation. Tasmad Om Itya Udharyatya Yagna Dana Tapaha Kriya Pravartante Vidhanoktaha Satatam Brahmavadinam. Therefore, all knowers of Brahman utter Om, acts of sacrifice, charity, and austerity are thus begun with this sacred syllable. In the Upanishads, Om represents Brahman. Om represents the totality of existence, and Om sanctifies action. So the significance here is when you start any action with Om, you are remembering the divine. The action is no longer religious, it becomes spiritual. It is no longer a human action, it becomes consecrated, it becomes sacred. It's often said that at the beginning of creation, at the beginning of time, there was a sound, and that sound was Om. And that Om created this universe. But somehow we got it wrong. And from Om, we became absorbed not in Om, but we became absorbed in Aham. So when Om becomes Aham, we identify with Prakriti. And when we Aham becomes Om, we identify with Bhagavan, with God, with the all-pervading Brahman. You should try it if you've not tried Om chanting. You sit in a room and for 45 minutes to an hour, just chant Om from the pit of your stomach and let the vibrations fill your body and the room. And you will experience what it means in a very short time to know what the transition from Aham to Om is. It shatters the concept of the ego self. It begins by the chanting of Om, you begin to become absorbed in God. In 17.25, Tat itya anabhisandhaya phalam yagna tapah kriya dana kriyascha vividha kriyante moksha kankshibhi. Thus uttering Tat without seeking fruit, sacrifice, austerity, and charities are performed by the seekers of liberation. So when you say Om, you remember God. When you say Tat, you're saying that these actions and the fruits of these actions do not belong to me. It is for Tat, it is for that. What is that? That is Om. So Om consecrates action. Tat removes your ownership, and Tat also removes your absorption in the ego self. This directly anticipates chapter 18's doctrine of Tyag. The action remains. The claim, my action, my fruit, is gone. So we say Om to remember God, Tat we say to remove our ownership and remove the ego self's participation as the doer, which it is not, and also it gives up all aspiration for the fruit. In 26th and 27th verse, it says, Sadbhave sadhu bhave cha sad itya etat prayujyate yagne tapasi dane cha sthiti cha diti chochyate karma chaiva tad arthiyam sad itya eva vidhiyate. Sat is used in the sense of reality and goodness. Sat stands for steadfastness in sacrifice and austerity, and charity is called Sat. Actions performed for that purpose are also called Sat. Sat has multiple meanings: being, reality, truth, goodness, authenticity. Sat answers a subtle problem. A person may begin with Om, he may dedicate with Tat, yet he may fail to persevere and continue with the action. So the steadfast commitment to sacred action, he stands for authentic perseverance in reality. Thus, indeed, Om stands for consecration to God, making it sacred by invoking God. Tat stands for renunciation. If Om stands for consecration, Tat stands for renunciation. And Sat stands for continuing to persevere in the performance of these duties in reality. It's also important to understand that if you go to the Vedas, very often it is considered to be a fault, a sin, to chant Vedic mantras incorrectly, to perform them in a manner by which they are not really perfectly chanted. And therefore, it is said that in order to remove all fault, in order to remove all actions which may not be perfect, and indeed to make everything perfect, in the chanting of the Vedic mantras at the conclusion, one says, Om Tat Sat. Om Tat Sat means, Lord, this is offered for you. I don't expect anything in return, and I will continue performing my sacrifices, my austerities, my charity in a spirit of devotion to you. So in 17.28, Krishna says, Ashraddhaya hutam datam tapastaptam kritam yacha yat asaditi uchyate partha na cha tat pretya no iha. Whatever is offered, given, or practiced without faith is called asat. It is of no value here or thereafter. Everything requires faith. Faith is the currency of the spiritual world. Indeed, if you are in Japan, you need yen. If you are in the US, you need the dollar. In UK, you need the pound. But when you enter into spiritual life, you need faith. Ashraddhadhana purusha dharmasyasya parantapa aprapyamam nivartante mrityu sansara vartmani. Those who engage on this path without faith, they fall down from their spiritual position, they return again to this material world. Shraddhaval labate jnanam tatparat samyat indriyah. So, those who are engaging with devotion and faith, Shraddhaval labate jnanam, they attain knowledge. Tatparat samyat indriyah, jnana labdhva param shantim achirena adhigacchati. So those who engage with faith in a very short time, they attain the divine. Without faith, everything is asat. So Krishna is redefining the entire meaning of the Vedic religion. One of the philosophies which are quoted in the Bhagavad-Gita is karma mimamsa, the performance of Vedic karmas. In chapter 3 it is described. But there you simply need to perform the ritual perfectly because it generates its own ritual potency known as apurva. In the Bhagavad-Gita, ritual is transformed. Effectiveness depends not merely on correct performance, but on remembrance or absorption in God, Om, renunciation of doership and the fruit, which is Tat, and truth-oriented steadfastness, which is Sat. And this depends on Shraddha. So the center shifts from ritual mechanics to spiritual intention. And this is a revolutionary move. So chapter 18 begins with what is sannyas and what is tyag. Because Om Tat Sat has already prepared the answer. The sequence is what makes an action sacred, Om Tat Sat. What does it mean to renounce? Not abandoning action. Yagya dana tapa karma na karyam tyajam evatat yagya dana tapa karma pavanani manishinam. You don't abandon action, you abandon ownership and fruit, which is exactly what has been taught here in the conclusion of the 17th chapter. In fact, 17.25 is almost a preview of 18.2. Give up attachment to the results. The seed is planted in chapter 17. The full doctrine appears in chapter 18. In fact, this is a practical, very, very practical method by which you can dedicate your actions to God. You may work in an office, you may work in a factory, you may be working as a professional, but all you need to do is before the performance of your action, you just need to say Om Tat Sat. You start with Om Tat Sat, you conclude with Om Tat Sat, which means this is the action I'm offering to you, O Lord. And by the simple chanting of Om Tat Sat before you enter your office, and Om Tat Sat when you are leaving your office, when you're leaving your factory, when you're leaving your hospital, when you're leaving your office or place of work, or the courts or wherever else you're working. You say Om Tat Sat when you enter, you say Om Tat Sat when you leave, which means that all that you're doing is being offered to God. And if you do this with faith, with devotion, I assure you, you will get wonderful, deep sleep every night. Every day you begin with Om Tat Sat, every evening you conclude with Om Tat Sat. And when you go to bed, you will get complete peace of mind and deep relaxation. So you should understand this, that it starts with Om Tat Sat, where you're offering your work to God. But then it goes on to 17.25. Or rather, 17.25 leads to 9.27. In 9.27, Krishna says, Yat karoshi yad ashnasi yat johosi dadasi yat tapasyasi kaunteya tat kurushamadarpanam. So Krishna says that you start by doing Om Tat Sat in the activities you perform, which you offer to God with love and devotion. But then, gradually you elevate, you expand, you rise, you evolve to Yat Karoshi, Yad Ashnasi, Yat Johosi, Dadasi, Yat Tapasyasi, Kaunteya, Tat Kurusha Madarpana. Whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer, whatever you give away, whatever charities, whatever austerities you perform, do it for me. Why? Because if you do it for him, everything, then eventually you will be absorbed in God. Because the work that you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer, whatever you give away, whatever charities, whatever austerities you perform, you are offering it to Bhagavan. And this leads to the verse. Man manabhava mad bhakto mad yaji mam namaskaru mami vaishyasi yukta evam atmanam mat parayana. Man manabhava mad bhakto mad yaji mam namaskaru mam vaishyasi satyam te pratijani priyasi mai. So you start by offering your work, Om Tat Sat, your yajna, dan and tapah, you offer with Om Tat Sat. Then you move on to offering everything to God. Yat karoshi yadashnasi. And when you're offering everything to God, you will be constantly absorbed in God, constantly absorbed in the divine. Man manabhava mad bhakto mad yaji mam namaskuru. Mam evaishyasi yukta evam atmana mat parayana. And when you have moved to man manabhava mad bhakto, which is 9.34 and 18.65, you come finally to the conclusion of the Bhagavad-Gita, which is 18.66, which is Sarva Dharman Parityaja Mam Ekam Sharanam Vraja. Aham Tvam Sarva Papebhyo Mokshayishami Masucha. When you do complete Atmanivedanam, Atmanivedanam. So why doesn't Krishna use his own name? Why does he say, why don't you say Krishna Arpanam? Why does he say Om Tat Sat? And the answer to that is that Krishna leads you from Prakriti to Brahman, and from Brahman, only the select few who are devotees of him come to that realization of Man Manabhava, Yat Karoshi Yadashnasi, and Sarva Dharman Parityaja. So it's a process of receiving knowledge, confidential knowledge, and most confidential knowledge. And that most confidential knowledge is Krishna. Whereas the confidential knowledge is that you must devote everything to the all-pervading Lord. So it takes you in stages from guna-based religion to the impersonal Brahman. And finally, you will see in chapter 18 that he takes you to Bhagavan. Because Krishna says, Idam na tapaskaya na bhaktaya kadachana. This knowledge of Krishna being the source that Krishna is the one to be worshipped is not to be given to everybody. Those who are not inclined to listen, those who have no faith, those who are not austere, such people are not told about Krishna. They should stick to the lower levels of realization. Even though klesho diktarastesham avyakta sakta chetasam avyakta hi gatir dukkham dehavad bhiravapyate. Even though the attachment to worshipping God in the formless leads to great difficulties and suffering. So, with this, Krishna has already declared earlier, he has given earlier hints about Om. He says, I am the source of everything in 10.8. He says, there is nothing superior to me in 7.7. He says, I am the enjoyer and the Lord of all sacrifice in 9.24. He's already said in 9.34, fix your mind upon me. He's also declared, Pranava Sarva Vedeshu. He says, I am that Om. I am that Om in 7.8. Similarly, in 9.17, he says, Aham Kriturak Aham Yagya. So he says, I am the ritual, I am the sacrifice, I am the mantra. So why does he begin with Om? Because Gita teaches progressively. The Vedic seeker begins with Om. The Karma Yogin learns Tat, this is not mine. The seeker learns Sat, to abide in the truth. Then Krishna says, whatever you do, offer it to me, 9.27. Finally, he says, fix your mind upon me. Man mana bhava mad bhakto, 18.65. And ultimately, he says, take refuge in me alone, 18.66. Sarva dharman parityaja, mam ekam sharanam vraja. For those who are Vaishnavas, the pranava is expressing the relationship between the individual soul and the Supreme Lord. A stands for Supreme Lord Narayana. U stands for the inseparable divine consort, that is Lakshmi. And stands for the individual soul. So by chanting Om, it encapsulates the soul's dependence and belonging to the Lord. When Krishna says Om, he is not avoiding his own name. He is invoking the sacred Vedic symbol that already signifies him and the soul's relationship to him. In 15.15, the Lord says, Vedascha sarver aham eva vedyo vedantakrit veda videva chaham. By all the Vedas, I alone am the person to be known. He said, Brahmano hi pratishtaham amritasya vyasya cha. Krishna says that I am the source of Brahman. I am the rest of Brahman. So Krishna is absolute. But on the way to Krishna, for those who are not yet prepared with faith, they should use Om, Om Tat Sat. Then you can progress gradually to Krishna. Yat karoshi yadashnasi. And then finally you move on to Man Mana Bhava Mad Bhakto and Sarva Dharman Parityaja. With this, I conclude the 17th chapter of the Bhagavad-Gita. If anyone has anything to say, anything to ask, please feel free.
Thank you, Shantanu for today's lovely session. My first question is how can someone living a busy modern life apply Gita's teaching without formally following a religion?
Please say it again slowly.
How can someone who's living a very busy modern life apply Gita's teachings without formally following a religion?
I told you this is a simple act of transcending the ego self. Before you enter your office, you say Om Tat Sat. With the conclusion of your work in the office, when you leave, say Om Tat Sat. This is the beginning. And as you advance, other things will automatically fall in line.
All right. And the next question is, do you think the journey from religion to spirituality is necessary, or can both coexist?
No, we are not telling you to give up religion. We are not asking you to give up religion. We are asking you to make your religious act spiritual. So, of course, both exist, both coexist. Is
All
it
right.
clear?
Thank you so much, Shantuji, for today's session. And to all our viewers, if you liked it too, then don't forget to share this video with your loved ones. Also, stay tuned as we meet again on next Thursday at 8 a.m. for yet another session on the Bhagavad Gita. Hare Krishna.
Hari Om. Jai Shri Krishna, Hare Krishna.